Coming up, a Sad Styles production.
Hey guys, it's Mikey, host of the Sign Off Podcast. And before we get started with today's episode, we just have some quick housekeeping to do. If you listened to last week's episode, we had Sean Chalk, who is the moderator of Wayne Gretzky Collecting on Facebook, as well as the man who many call the Wayne Gretzky of Wayne Gretzky Collectors. We did a giveaway in tandem with him and in tandem with the group to anyone who liked, subscribed, rated, reviewed, and tagged us on Twitter. All the details were in the post. We're entered in a draw to win a signed Wayne Gretzky Edmonton Oilers jersey. Guys, this was a big ticket item, and we want to thank everyone who supported us, who rated us, reviewed us, subscribed us, shared it on social media. Because of you, we shot up the charts, and we saw a ton of success there, so thank you so much. Don't forget, if you haven't yet, leave us a rating and review. Week after week, we're actually taking some of those reviews and doing giveaways, reading it on air. You'll see in this episode, we do it once again. So without further ado, the winner of this week, the signed Wayne Gretzky Edmonton Oilers jersey, I've been waiting all week to read this off, is Spiro Theologos. I hope I'm getting that right. Theologos, I'm not sure. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. At Spiro Teach 97 on Twitter. Also a member of the Wayne Gretzky Collecting group on Facebook. So Spiro, reach out to us, signoffpod@frameworth.com, and we will get you your jersey sent out to you. No charge. That was part of the deal, right? That was the deal. We're not going to now send you a bill for it. Of course, that would be outrageous. So we're going to get into the main episode today, a very exciting episode, and we will see you guys on the other side. Hello and welcome. My name is Mikey Aaronworth, signing on to the Sign Off, a Frameworth podcast for yet another week, and I am joined in studio once again by the man who smiles every time I mention his name. I'm thinking it's because you're starting to like me a little bit, or is it just because you're still nervous?
No, I'm still waiting to like you, and that's
okay. It's been 32 years in the making, but one day it's Brian Aaronworth, president of Frameworth Sports Marketing. Once again, this is the Sign Off. It is the forum for all the stories you didn't know you wished you knew about the world of sports and sports marketing, and we're joined in studio by a very special guest. This week, a household name in the world of hockey journalism. He's a current NHL Insider for NHL.com with articles also featured in Bleacher Report, National Post, Toronto Sun, among many others. He may be used to asking the hard-hitting questions, but for the next hour or so, the roles will be reversed as we get to know our good friend, Mike Zeisberger.
It's real pleasure to be on here, and bring it on. Okay,
let's do it.
I'm in the other chair now, so bring it on. I'm ready.
Excited. I feel the energy. I feel the energy of someone who's willing to come on and tell some stories about their industry. You know, we say it all the time. There are tons of podcasts out there that are going to be willing and able to talk about the stories that happen on and off the ice. You know, what happened last night and the night before. And I know you do a lot of that, Mike. But what I'm interested in, and what we're interested here at the Sign Off, is more about the industries and the jobs that come as a result of sports being as popular as they are. And I think you're perfect for that. Now, before we get into the meat and potatoes of the episode, the grilling. We're going to hold your feet to the fire quite a bit here, but instead of that, right now we're going to actually do a little bit of the opposite. Our fans have been singing our praises a little bit over on iTunes, and we've been very grateful for that. We've been asking you to go onto iTunes and leave a review, and every so often we're going to pick one or two out and send you a little bit of a special something. Every so often we might just read it and give you a bit of a shout out as well. But there was one review that I wanted to read with a little bit of a caveat, but from Zach Z92 via Apple Podcasts, diehard Oilers fan here, love the pod, lifelong Oilers fan and an avid memorabilia collector with a business background. To see the intertwined discussion between my hobby and the business of sports and sports marketing makes this a podcast that I look forward to and enjoy listening to each week. As a collector in this hobby of over 10 years, I enjoy the stories of how Frameworth came to be, how signings are managed, and the banter with some of the individuals you've had on in the past. It goes on from there. Now, one thing I will mention, very glowing review. So thank you very much, Zach Z, and I want you to reach out to us. We're actually going to be sending you a Kevin Lowe photo, a signed Kevin Lowe photo. So reach out to signoffpod@frameworth.com. We'll get your details and send that out to you. One thing, and this, I'm not asking you to go change it, although it would be nice. That glowing review came with a 1 out of 5 star rating, and I believe that might have been a mistake. If you're leaving us some ratings and reviews, it is important to make sure that you click the star rating that you actually feel you should give us. Otherwise, maybe he's just a really hard marker. You know those teachers that you had in school? Just a really hard marker? Like, perfect work, 60 out of 100. Okay, thanks very much.
We were just lucky enough to actually, we really do appreciate the rates, reviews, and subscriptions. Because last week when we did this and we read a review, I think we went from over 100 on the Chartables rating up to 56, I believe it was, because of the support that we got. So we really do appreciate it. The higher up in the support, we got to get past Bob McCowan. No,
Fellow on
Bob's
the
a good friend of mine and Mike. So no, I'm kidding, but it would be nice.
Well, no, it's fun to say that. Listen, everyone wants to have their cryptocurrency of choice. They want to attach their name to it and see it go through the moon, whether it's Dogecoin or Shiba or Ethereum. How about attach your name to your favorite podcast and see that go to the top of the Chartable charts? Let's make it happen.
So Kevin was just in town with Mark Messier for the Hall of Fame. We did a quick signing with both those guys, and so we're going to send you a Kevin Lowe signed photo as a thank you for that great review.
Well, I mean, if you heard our voice over the sound of us patting our own backs there, congratulations. But let's move on from there. Mike, I mentioned in your introduction that you are an NHL insider. Long and storied career prior to that, and we'll get into that as well. But why don't we start by having you explain a little bit of what that means?
Well, first of all, when you know, on one hand, they may call me a veteran. What that means is I've been lucky enough to be in this business as long as I have. Look, I mean, the other night after the Hall of Fame, I was privileged enough to be at the after party. Mm-hmm. And you're standing in a room with Paul Coffey and Mark Messier and Lidstrom, and I can go down the list, all the inductees, Doug Wilson and Kevin Lowe, the aforementioned Kevin Lowe. And look, guys, I mean, I just turned 59 last week. I'll always be the kid from Scarborough that played road hockey after school every night on the dead-end street. And there's moments like that, even as I approach middle age, where I'm just going like, this is cool.
Hell
and
yeah.
why am I here?
Yeah.
I'm the road hockey kid from Scarborough. Why am I here? And that to me, you know, I just want to give the listeners a little bit of context,
Yeah.
is that, you know, you do find people in our business that at some point got so cynical that it has become a business. And it hasn't, you know, maybe at some point in my life it will. But I just think that I'm really damn fortunate to be able to do what I do, to be around these people, to have garnered the trust. And I believe that is a very, very important thing in our business, is to garner the trust of people in the business. Okay. And, you know, very quickly, my guidelines have always been, short of going over rules or, you know, I mean, we're going through this Kyle Beach stuff and racism and stuff like that. That's going over the line, obviously. But, you know, I will judge somebody on what they do on the ice, on the field. Okay. And I tried to do that fairly, and I'll be critical when I have to be, and I'll shower you with praise when I have to. But what happens off the field, if you're not involved in a criminal thing, or like I said again, whether it's racism, whether it's, you know, what we just saw happen in Chicago. Yeah, you know what? People should live their lives. The most difficult thing about that, guys, that I find now and how the industry has changed, and I'll just tell you a real quick thing. So one of my best friends, Kyle Shore, his son Devin is a forward with the Edmonton Oilers.
Yep.
And this kid will always be, I've always told him, you're my friend first. I've known you since you were 4 weeks old, in the top of the Stanley Cup at Glenn Healy's party.
This is Devin you're talking about.
Yes, yeah. Devin Shore in 1994. He was 4 weeks old. Healy used to play for Devin's grandfather hockey in Pickering when he was coming up.
Wow.
So I've always said to Devin, look, I have your back first and my job is second. I'll always look out for you. And one of the things that I learned early on is, you know what? Maybe you should stay off social media, because when I started in the business,
kidding. Great advice for most of the guys.
Well, actually, can I take that thread a little bit? Because a lot of good things that you've touched on there, and one of the things that you've mentioned that I definitely want to talk about today, and we may as well get into it now because you've mentioned social media, is the way in which the industry and your job in particular has changed since you first came to be. Nowadays,
No way.
you're live tweeting games. You're constantly, like, Twitter to you feels like it's always on. You're always writing these miniature articles. You can also give advice to some of the players that you're writing about, stay on or stay off social media. It's a double-edged sword. It can really help, but it can also really hurt you. Do you find now that you're kind of always on? Is it an added level of stress that you constantly have to be checking in? Or is that something that, because this still doesn't quite feel like work for you, just kind of comes with as another way for you to vent these ideas you have about the industry?
Yeah, it comes with it. I mean, you have to be comfortable in your own skin. The one thing that I told them, look, there's some players that are wonderful on social media because, again, they're comfortable in their own skin.
Right.
They can read the room, that they don't put themselves into positions like that. Where I think it's changed a lot for the players, okay, is the fact that everybody's got a camera phone.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you want to go out after...
Even the fact that they're not even called camera phones anymore. They're just like, that's how one-to-one it is. Not everyone has a camera phone, because there was a time when it's like, be careful of camera phones. Now everyone has a 4K recording something on them at all
if they
times.
want to go out for a beer or a drink after a game, you never know where Big Brother is watching you. And that, to me, is the biggest difference. And where I kind of learned the boundary of that is, early in my career, and I was always focused on hockey, but I had the pleasure of doing the Blue Jays from 93 to 98, and we all know what happened in 93. But at the time when I was at the Toronto Sun, you would be able to go on the team charter. There was one seat for the Sun and one seat for the Star, okay? So, you did your job and you're critical, but the one thing they told you is what happens on the plane stays on the plane.
Right.
And I have to say, there was never anything that would have been scandalous or anything like that, but you still learned. Like, you have to, in your own mind, separate what's news and what isn't news. And that can be a gray area sometimes. And I just think that now with Twitter, and Twitter, there's some wonderful stuff on Twitter.
Yep.
But it also turns cowards. It gives them bravery because it's anonymous.
Right.
So it's a double-edged sword for the player. So
do you feel like there's been a fragmentation of what people consider to be sports news, in the sense that there is that element of news that is, what quote unquote happens on the plane, that was never supposed to be what hockey was.
Yeah.
And now half the people who are interested in sports, not just hockey, are more interested in it for the scandal of the individuals.
Well, some people aren't even interested in the sports. They're just interested in the scandal.
Right.
And that's an important difference between then and now. And we're old school guys.
Yeah.
We grew up with the Bobby Hulls and those guys, and some of the stories that we are privileged to hear or privy to hear is that, what happened behind the scenes. And they tell them to people like us because they trust us. That's none of anybody else's business.
No.
And the difference between some players, look, we're both in this industry and we talk to a lot of players, and I hear all sorts of different opinions. Some kind of shock me from some players. Most of the guys that I deal with are now moving into this new area, but it was a different era back there. If you heard the language on the bench back then, people would be kicked out of the league for some of the things they were saying back then. Is it right? No, it wasn't right, but we're learning that it isn't right. I go through this in my head all the time with my kids, et cetera.
But Brian, and we'll stick to language here. We're not going to, talk about, because there have been things in the past, and we've mentioned a couple of them that are, that they're just way over the line. But back then, we didn't know it was wrong, and that's not to justify it.
We didn't feel it was wrong. We probably should have known it was wrong, but we didn't.
We should have known it was wrong. Yes.
And the words that we used back in high school, and the players used, and what they said on the ice was wrong. But it was a different world back then, and so I'm not making excuses for any of that stuff. But if you want to be friends with some of especially the old school guys, you got to bury that stuff. That's not really part of the game that we should be, or you should be reporting, in my mind anyways.
Well, I think it's
makes for
interesting.
good books if you want to put it in there. But
I'd like to, and I know, Mike, you've been careful to do this when we go too far towards one side here, but I do want to draw a distinction between banter and typical just, off the cuff, off color remarks, and some of the more significant stories which have been taking place in the league today. You mentioned the Kyle Beach situation earlier, and we don't need to drum up necessarily all of the controversy there and get into specifics, but you've been very vocal about this situation in terms of what the Chicago Blackhawks have done wrong. I think you've done a good job of what a lot of people will consider coming out on the right side of history of this story. And without getting necessarily into the details, it's becoming more and more clear that what needs to happen is a reconciliation, in the sense that some people do need to admit that some of the things that were going on in the sport, whether it was 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago, were wrong. And acknowledging that is part of the healing process. What do you think, Mike, needs to happen in order to weed out some of these elements of the game that have sort of ingrained themselves in a way that the quote unquote old boys club is defending themselves, and the new age is saying we need to get this out of the game? What changes do you think need to happen in order to bring everyone on the same page here?
Well, I think where you start sailing into uncharted waters here is, we talked about how different social media is and everything like that. I think, and it's more a reflection of society now, that we want answers right away. That is today, okay? And it's like Twitter, okay?
Right.
If something happens, you want it, people want to know right away. Like,
Yes.
I remember when people first started tweeting stuff from practice about line rushes.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, this is, for me, it was like, this is ridiculous. Who's going to care? And you know what?
Everyone
Cared,
Yeah.
okay? And I admit I was wrong. So in things like this, and I'm not talking about the litigation, and I'm not talking about, what should happen with Kyle, because, nobody should have to go with what he went through.
Right.
But everybody's demanding, in the court of public opinion, what's going to be done about this now? Let's get it, let's have this. It's almost like a Salem witch hunt at times. And I understand how the emotions get into this, not so much on that specific case, but the old boys club.
Yep.
I actually do think that it's starting to shift.
Yeah.
And one of the examples is, this week they had the Primetime Sports Management Conference here in Toronto, where a lot of the sports leaders, management types were speaking. And I had a chance to sit down with Kim Davis, who works for the National Hockey Leagues, coming up on 4 years. And she has done a lot for inclusion, dealing with racism. And she said something really interesting to me. She said, 4 years ago, she might get one call a day, even a week, from NHL leaders or management types saying, like, we're having this issue. How do I deal with this?
Right.
She says she might get 15 a day now.
Wow.
From general managers, from team presidents.
Do you think that happens as a result of this is kind of a big question, but do you think that happens as a result of people not wanting to do the wrong thing because they don't want to find themselves in trouble? Or do you think that the consciousness is shifting and people are becoming more aware of what is right and wrong?
Well, going back to my high school days way back when, I'll take C, all of the above, because we all know that C was the most answer. If you didn't, you didn't have the answer, pick C.
Yeah.
But no, I do think that it is a little bit of both. Mm-hmm. I think in some parts people want to be proactive, and I think in some situations, because this has been such an evolving thing, as Brian said, getting out of the old boys club.
Right.
Some of it is reaction.
Yes.
Because people don't know, because they've been so stuck in their ways for a long time. They don't know, okay, what do I do here?
Well,
now?
you know what? And I was just thinking about this, because the problem with especially old school guys like us is the line is shifting so quickly. And you mentioned everybody wants answers right now, except today something's acceptable, tomorrow it isn't. And we're just learning everything that's happening so quickly. we're kind of getting away from the thing of sports, but this is what the players have to deal with.
Yes.
They make a comment, and the next, 3 months later, what was acceptable even a year ago? I'm not talking about the heavyweight stuff, but what a comment that was made 2 years ago is like no, it's no good to say right now, and you're in trouble for it. That line is moving so quickly. What's acceptable, what isn't, and then I think the pendulum is gonna swing back a little bit because people are getting a little fed up with how far this has gone the other way.
Well,
guilty until
and all
judged
that.
innocent.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the league is dealing with two issues right now. One is the video review and dealing with lines in the offside realm, and the other is lines in terms of what you can and cannot say and that sort of thing. It's happening all over the place.
I just want to say one thing to Brian's comment about old school. Yeah, you and I may be old school, but I think, I don't think that's a label that either can be used for either one of us, knowing you as I do, because we're willing to shift. We understand that the shift, okay?
Yeah.
What I consider old school is that there still are people in the game that are old school, that don't want to shift, okay? They don't want to see that the way their line of thinking for so many years was wrong.
Right.
Maybe minutely.
Well, that's exactly the difference. And I'm not going to mention any names here. I just spoke to a player from previous era last week, and I was just blown away. And I just bite my tongue. I should correct, but there's no way I'm going to correct the person. So there is that whole mentality of some guys just won't change their ways. We when I say old school, I mean we grew up in a different era of hockey, and today, but what happened in the 60s and 70s and whatever is a lot different than it is now.
Yeah.
So that's change. I'm willing to certainly make all the changes that I need to change as much as I can. But when I say old school, that's just coming from a different time. When you're saying old school, you're saying these are people that aren't willing to make the change, and
which
that's
we know
that
are still in the game.
Right.
Now, how important? Because Dad, you mentioned that you're talking to a player, and it isn't necessarily your role within the relationship with that player to make a comment when they make a comment that might be offline a little bit. But Mike, do you consider your role as a member of the media as one which carries some of the responsibility to either make those comments, not necessarily calling someone out, but to ensure that the narrative structure of the articles that you're releasing are constantly kind of pushing towards change, even if it's gradual?
Certainly, yeah. But that all goes hand in hand with the way that the league is evolving,
right?
And the way that the young players are coming up. I think you have to, and that's part of being open-minded. And I want to give an example of this, of how, we touched on social media, and the thing about social media now is that before, when I first got in there, I looked up to some of the iconic people like Frank Orr, the great Frank Orr, who's in the Hockey Hall of Fame, was my mentor. And I would, I know my former colleague at the Sun, Steve Simmons, used to say this, but I agreed with him, because I was an ankle skater and knew I needed training wheels on my skates, so I knew I wasn't going to play. But, everybody in my neighborhood wanted to be Bobby Orr, and I wanted to be Frank Orr. So, that's
a great analogy.
I love that.
But you look now, those were the people you looked up to because they were the respected voices, okay? Well, now on Twitter, it's even more and more difficult to have people respect your voice, even when you have a body of work like I do or my colleagues, because everybody has an opinion on Twitter, and now they have a forum to be able to air it.
Right.
Okay? And I just want to go into a quick example. Hopefully I can stick handle in this direction and you guys are okay with that. Yeah. But we've all seen...
we can keep up because you do still ankle skate, so you can stick handle in whatever direction you want.
I got to grease those training wheels. They're getting a little rusty. But, we've seen in the city the passion in Toronto for the Maple Leafs. And look, I mean, Mitch Marner would be the first to tell you You know, he didn't score in the playoffs last year. He had a drought. This kid would be the first to tell you that he deserved the criticism in terms of not being able to produce the way that he wanted to.
Right.
Okay?
Constructive criticism.
Constructive criticism. Okay, on the ice, this is the direction that we're going in. Okay. Having said that, okay, Matthews only scored 1 goal in the playoffs last year, but because, and I'm not going to say it was because of social media, but there was a wicked backlash at Mitch on social media that went far beyond. Well, number one, you know what? To make him the scapegoat for the Toronto Maple Leafs losing again,
Right.
This goes way deeper than one guy.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And there's a difference there. Number two, the personal attacks are just ridiculous because this is a kid that grew up here, that dreamed of playing here, that wants to play here. People look at his contract and seem to blame him for that. Well, hey, the team gave him that money.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
So if there's a market and somebody gives you that, you don't hold it against, to me, you don't hold it against the player for doing that. Here's another thing that, and you know, because I just hate these personal attacks against Mitch or anybody. These people do not know what the Mitch Marner off the ice. And I got to know this a couple years ago. So we're in November right now, which is Hockey Fights Cancer Month.
Yep.
So when Mitch played for the London Knights, he would do hospital tours in London. And he met a little girl named Hayden Foulin who, and, you know, hopefully I don't get too emotional talking about this, but who was diagnosed with leukemia at 18 months old. Mm-hmm. And Mitch had befriended this little girl like, she called him Mitch 16. They got a dog and the Mitchie.
Yeah.
But you walked into her room in London and I go for a visit. And this little girl was, I think, 6 at the time, and she had spent half her life in and out of hospitals. And it was like a shrine to Mitch. And I got to know her so much. Mitch called her, she's my hero. Mm-hmm. And he brought her to games, you know, for her birthday. And just the lengths that he went to make this little girl's life full and complete. And not because he wanted publicity and not
because nobody's heard the story. So
yes.
Obviously, and we talk many players like that don't look, they don't walk into a hospital with a camera crew.
Yeah.
They just go do it on their own.
Yeah.
And Mitch is one of those guys.
And she passed away. We just went through the 2nd anniversary of her passing, and it struck Mitch really hard. It struck me really hard. Mitch is still in touch with the family. Brings him to the, to the event that he has, the charity event, every year. And, you know, so this is, I didn't mean to keep going on and on with this story, but this is what upsets me sometimes is that, you know what? I mean, again, you want to be constructive criticism. You want, you know, even from fans, okay? You don't like the way he plays, whatever. There's a way of saying that,
yeah.
Okay?
Without taking personal attacks.
Yeah, you're paying a guy that much money. He should produce, okay? Connor McDavid scored that amazing goal a couple of weeks ago,
yeah.
And the first thing he said is, well, they pay me a lot of money to score a goal.
To do that, right?
But the off-ice stuff...
So, Mike, let me ask you this, because you touched on it. We both know Mitch pretty well.
Yeah.
I got to know Austin as well during the time that we worked exclusively with him. They both underperformed, to say the least, in the playoffs. And yet Mitch took way more heat than anybody else. Why is it, do you feel, that Mitch took all the heat and Matthews was basically left off the hook?
Well, I think part of it, and I mean,
You don't have to answer if you feel it's
no. I'm trying to. Everybody knew that Austin's wrist wasn't good. Okay. And say what you want about Austin. I mean, the first thing I think of when I hear Austin Matthews' name is his shot.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay. Because it's so elite.
Yep.
I've done stories like asking the Brett Hulls and guys of, Al McInnes's about it.
What do you think? Yeah.
And they're blown away by the shot. So when you take away a guy's strength like that, and it's public knowledge.
So that was why they let him off the hook?
No,
I don't want to put
part,
words in your
that's
mouth.
part of it.
Okay.
The other part of it, I've never understood it with Mitch. Why there seemed to be, Austin got signed first.
Right.
Okay, so it's like, okay, we got our stable guy. And then it's time for Mitch to come up, and that went through the summer, and I don't know. And sometimes it befuddles me because you would think, okay, there was a time when I covered this team that local guys didn't want to play here. They didn't want to play here.
Right.
Okay? You're in the fishbowl. Everything that we've been talking about. You go to a restaurant, somebody has a camera phone.
Yep.
Okay? Those are facts.
We've had conversations with some players in the past who said that, great market, never want to play there.
Yeah.
I mean, it becomes that added pressure that some people don't need.
What I find is that when Lou Lamoriello was here, he found a way. He understood. He said he was going to change the culture. Number one, it wasn't going to be a country club anymore. But number two, he found guys that wanted to play here because there are homegrown guys that grew up that way. It's too bad that the Leafs couldn't keep Zach Hyman. I know they really wanted to keep him. He wanted to stay here. Look, salary cap implications, that's the modern day NHL. But I remember going up to Zach, might have been last year, and it's like a Wednesday practice in November. Okay? And I forget, there might have been 30 media, and it was a positive day, but there might have been 30 media around Mitch. Okay? Like there's teams in this league that don't get 30 media combined
for the entire
practice
team.
for an entire month.
Right.
And I'm standing with Zach and I go, doesn't this get tiresome for you? When you watch this and stuff, he goes, no. You know why? Because, 10 years ago or whenever it was, I was the kid in Toronto on the couch going, give me more Leafs coverage.
True.
Right.
I want more. I want more. I want more. So he says, I understand it.
Right.
And that's the way that Zach presented himself to us. So here you have a guy like Mitch who is an elite talent that wants to be here. And I just don't.
And they're going to drive him out.
Yeah.
Like it's really tough because, he's certainly not thin-skinned, but
Brian, why though? I can't explain it.
Well,
don't you want that kid on your team? If you don't recognize how talented he is, then you don't know hockey.
Look, the Toronto Maple Leafs have put together a phenomenal team on paper. And I think,
they're starting
in
to show it
practice
now
as well,
too, yeah.
and last year as well. And I think the thing that we have always done in Toronto, I'm a fan as well, and you see it in the media. Mike, you've been involved in it forever, so I'm sure you recognize this narrative as well. There's always the one player that everyone blames. It's the lightning rod scenario. And why is it that player? Because they're good enough to be the best and can't or may have faltered once, and then they're just the whipping boy at that point. I mean, it's happened to goalies, it's happened to defensemen, it's happened to Matt Sundin. If it can happen to Matt Sundin in Toronto, it can happen to anyone. And it just so happens that for whatever reason, Mitch Marner became that guy. And a lot of people don't understand it. When you really dig into the comments that are going on and you ask for practical reasons why everyone is so openly critical, not just about a potential performance issue in the playoffs, but about his personal life, no one really knows why. They just need their anger to get out somewhere, and he is the current lightning rod, and I don't envy that, and it doesn't seem fair.
So I think we should move on because we spent a lot of time on Mitch, and rightly so, because he's a great player. But I do want to get into, or you need to get into, Mike and his work with other players in the league too, because we have mutual friends that we spent some time with, Sidney Crosby and that. But one of the things that I respect about Mike is when you read his columns, you understand that Mike is critical, but also fair. And there's no hatchet jobs, and he does his job well. And the players understand that they're going to get criticized when they're not playing well. They're the first to do it, the good ones. But they also have a trust factor with certain reporters. And that's why Mike is so well respected around the league, because he's fair and he doesn't take advantage, but he'll report as he sees it and not really try and hurt anybody for any particular reason. There's so many other reporters that aren't like that. So,
well, Mike, I mean, where to kind of pull on that thread a little bit, where did that come from for you? You know, you've been around the Leafs for a lot longer than a lot of the people who are currently reporting, and it does seem that players, you know, it's not that they've known you longer, because some of them haven't been around as long anyway. What is it about your presence there that kind of invokes this trust, and how integral do you think that is in order for you to tell the narratives and write the articles that you need to write?
Well, I mean, I think it's something as simple as, you know, if you're a young player coming up and, you know, there was a generation of players that came out of Quebec that wanted to be Jean Beliveau.
Right.
And I still call him Mr. Beliveau because in my dealings with him, he was that class.
Right.
But players look at him and say, how can I be like him on and off the ice? Everybody's got their mentors that they look up to, and then they kind of soak in, sponge, if you will.
Yes.
What made those players like that. We're not talking about skill necessarily.
Sure. So
for me, you know, it was being around a mentor like Frank Orr. When I did the Blue Jays from 93 to 98, I had the pleasure of working with Bob Elliott, who is the only Canadian writer, by the way, that is enshrined in the journalist wing of Cooperstown.
Oh, really?
So when you're learning from somebody like that, when you're learning from somebody like a Scott Morrison, who is in the Hockey Hall of Fame, the Elmer Ferguson Award winner, you kind of, you know, I never went in thinking that I knew it all, which I have to say that there are people that enter the media that already think they do.
Sure.
I wanted to learn from them, so I watched. And I didn't just look at what they wrote. I watched the way that they interacted with players. Okay, I remember one of my the first games at the Gardens that I got to cover in that cave with the stalactites that was the visitors' dressing room at the Gardens, and Scotty Morrison and Frank Orr going in there and like Wayne Gretzky calling them by their first names. Okay, and I was really young, and it was like, wow, well, Wayne Gretzky knows their names. Something as simple as that.
Sure.
Now I know it's a lot different, but I watched the way how they interacted, and then I watched what the product would be the next day, how they wrote it, how they framed it, so to speak. And if, you know, that didn't mean that they were without criticism if the guy didn't,
of course,
work up to it. But there was a level of mutual respect there, and that's I think that's how I learned is I took from the guys that were the most respected in the business and took time to teach me what made them so good without, you know, everything wasn't just a puff piece or anything like that. Much like anything in life, if you're aspiring to do something, you look at the people that have been successful in that field. What have they done to get there?
So Frank Orr served as a mentor to you, but at a certain point, the training wheels have to come off, and you know, I don't want to say student skates becomes the matter. Not on your skates, yeah, maybe not. Still ankle skating around there, but what was that turn for you when you started to realize, you know, and not to say that you ever really stopped learning, but at a certain point, you understand that you can fly on your own. Was there a moment for you that you realized this is now your gig?
I don't know about that. It's you know, I mean, it can be intimidating. I mean, I had done, you know, I was only 3 years in full time at the Sun. I had just finished doing the CFL 3 or 4 years, and they had put me on the Jays. The Jays had won in 1992. So for me, that was the biggest that baseball was ever, even to this day in this town.
Yeah.
And you're going to, I remember the first day going to spring training, senior guy Bill Lankoff was with me. We're going to work out in Dunedin. And they've got all the prospects there and that. So you're watching the first workout. And I'm looking and, I know the Jays starting 9, but there's 4 or 5 guys taking ground balls at first base.
Right.
The double-A guy, the single-A guy, and I'm, like, overwhelmed. I'm having a panic attack. I'm going, like, I don't know these prospects. I don't know, because you want to be in the know.
You want to be the authority for all that, right?
And
you want to be telling other people who these people are.
And I remember Bill telling me, you know what? Just go at your own pace. Develop your own relationships, which is very, very important.
Right.
Okay. Go beyond just here we're going to bring a guy out and we're going to have a scrum.
Right.
Okay. Learn about these things at your own pace. Don't try to do everything at once. So I can't pinpoint one
moment,
one giant moment that okay, I'm here, I've made it. But it's when guys start coming up to you because they know you.
Right.
That you're not watching your colleagues going like, look at all the people, guys, how come they know? Because all of a sudden it's like, hey, they know me too.
Yes.
So I think it's more of a gradual climb.
Fair. I love how you kind of set this up, your sort of rise into prominence as a journalist as
You're saying he's prominent as a journalist?
I'm not saying it. I'm saying all your Twitter followers. I'm saying the public is saying.
If I'm not prominent, then who the hell turned this gig down so that you had to have me to come in?
So I like that you're setting this up. You start as a mentor. You talk about those early career jitters, almost imposter syndrome. I don't know this person. Like, I'm supposed to be the voice of authority here. And eventually you become the person to whom some of the other journalists come for a little bit of insight and information. What you've described is essentially the rise into comfort and prominence of an athlete. And at the end of the day, sports themselves are a business. Do you often consider, and do you think journalists in your position consider the act of journalism and the industry of journalism almost as a parallel sport to hockey, as though they're two kind of coinciding, or is it something different entirely?
No, because, and we talked about Bob Elliott earlier on, and Bob gave me some great advice because, as we all know, there are some big egos in sports journalism,
right?
Huge egos. And I remember Bob, and again, I'm going to say it again, the only Canadian writer that's in Cooperstown, him telling me, I remember he watched a guy that, used to think that his copy was the best thing that the world has ever produced. He said, Zeiss, he said, why should we have bigger egos than the people that we cover when if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have anything to cover?
But if no one were covering it, would it be as big as it is? Like, it's almost symbiotic. I think you need to give yourself a little bit more credit than that. No one's getting the story from the players themselves. They can watch it, but you as a journalist in your industry, and I know that you're going to be a little bit modest here, and that's fine. But the stories that are crafted in the industry are crafted by the people telling them.
Yeah.
And I think that you're aware of that responsibility because we've already spoken about how some people spread narratives that don't have anything to do with the sport and expect to get clicks as a result of that. And yet you're here kind of pulling the string the other way, ensuring that people are talking about the sport. Do you not feel that you have more of a role to play there?
Well, I think I felt it more in the past, like before there were this saturation of so many places to find your information, because it wasn't that long ago. I remember when I first started, like in hockey, like 2000, 2001, 2002, people weren't going to Sportsnet or TSN for their like, oh, here's the trade deadline. It was still like a writer. Right. Bob McKenzie was a writer. People forget about that. Right. Before he came this. But there is a part you asked me earlier about where you felt comfortable in your own skin.
Sure.
And one of my proudest moments where you asked me like what was the pinnacle. So the question, okay, when I look back at my career, the question, I think it was 2017 or 18 All-Star game in Los Angeles where they honored, it was the centennial of the NHL.
Right.
And they had the 100's greatest players, okay, or as many of them as they could on hand. And they had a press conference, and I'll never forget, Gretzky, Lemieux, Bobby Orr sitting up there.
Never heard of him.
Which is...
And you can go to YouTube for this, and I was going to ask the first question.
Wow.
Okay? And it's something that, again, the road hockey kid from Scarborough.
Yeah.
In that position.
Yep.
And it still blows me away. But I said, is the greatest player ever to play the game sitting at the podium in front of us?
That's a great question.
I don't think I could come up with a better question.
That's a
I mean,
great
if
question.
you guys got one, then...
No, that was an amazing
Although
question.
I would say there was a better question. Is Brian, how great a guy is Brian?
No, but I seem to, I don't remember the answer. If I had to guess, I would say Wayne would have deferred to Gordie Howe because that was his great player.
They all did.
Oh, they all did.
In their own way, yes.
To Gordie or to somebody else?
They all...
They didn't.
Wayne
they
deferred
didn't
to
say
Gordie.
yes for
They
sure.
laughed.
Yeah.
Wayne deferred to Gordie, and then the other two guys deferred to Wayne.
Oh, really?
But mentioning Gordie as the so none of them came out and said yes, and I'm in.
Well, you've talked to all three of them, so you and I both know the
Yes.
real answers that they wouldn't give politically correct.
No.
That's awesome, and what a good way to end the episode with what you thought was the beginning of your shining moment in journalism.
Always will
as it
be.
were.
I don't
Yeah.
know how I top that.
Awesome. Well, Mike, we're gonna taper off here. Anything you want to announce? I know you're on Twitter at Zeisberger, but anything else you're working on? Anything you want to send people over to check you out?
No, we're just doing some things on Hockey Fights Cancer Month, which is very important, and I mentioned how big a role that Mitch Marner has played in that. Got a couple things coming up. It's going to be the 2-year anniversary of Sheldon Keefe as the Maple Leafs coach.
Right.
Seems like a lot longer.
It honestly does. Yeah.
And we talked about social media earlier. I mean, 3 weeks ago, they were ready to tar and feather the guy.
Right.
And now it's like, well, this is the Leaf team that we need to see, which shows you the way that it goes. So, no, and it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure that you had me on, and please invite me back anytime. It's my pleasure.
Still lots more stories to go over. It usually is when we start talking to our guests. We find Gus Badali was the best example. 40 minutes into the show, and he hadn't even got to Wayne Gretzky. He blew me away with things. So usually when we have a good guest on, we just find, hey, we got to get these guys back.
It's good, and we've got I've got enough questions to fill another episode if we wanted to do one right now, but we'll save that for a later date, and we'll catch up with you again, Mike. Thank you so much for joining us. For Brian Aaronworth, the president of Frameworth Sports Marketing, I'm Mikey Aaronworth, and this is the Sign Off Podcast. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we made it to the end of yet another episode. Thanks again so much for joining us. You can find videos of all of our episodes on YouTube by searching the Sign Off Podcast. You can also follow us on Twitter at Frameworth Sport or Instagram at Frameworth Sports. And hey, if you're not sick of me yet, you can find me on Twitter over at Retrograde Mikey, or you can always find me embarrassing myself over on Instagram at Aaronworth. The Sign Off is a proud product of Fadoo Productions and Sad Styles Productions. Executive producers Mikey Aaronworth and Andrew Bascom. Until next week, this is Mikey Aaronworth, signing off.
Furnished by Sad Styles Productions.
Get into it.